We're living in a world where we're struggling more and more to deal with ourselves and handle ourselves. And if we look at the time frame of statistically when things have changed, there is no doubt that the advent of the iPhone has been a game changer for us. As I heard someone say, it's almost like we've given ourselves the keys to the liquor cabinet. Whenever we don't want to deal with something, we have this little gadget in our hand that we can go to appease our emotions, but it doesn't. That's the problem. So what it does is a great source of distraction. And as you and I both know, Rocky, there's a whole economy based around it, based around us being distractible. And they've made a fine art of how they can keep us distracted and keep us in their realm so that we'll buy more and more products from them.
Hey, it's Rocky. Welcome to Richer Soul. Today's guest is Monique Rhodes, who will share how to be happier. Imagine it's 12 months from now, and you've achieved your major life goals. How does it feel to be in the best shape of your life? To wake up energized, excited about the day? To have great relationships and friends who support you and propel you forward? How does it feel to have an excess of money, to be able to make the choices you want? To be fearless and open to trying new adventures? Imagine being connected to the universe and it providing everything you desire. It's possible over time, and your past does not dictate your future. The only thing holding you back from this vision is you. It's time to take control of our thoughts and use them to our advantage. Welcome to Richer Soul, where we achieve our dreams and create harmony to health, wealth, relationships, time, and spirituality. If you have not had a chance to listen to episodes 1 through 9, I encourage you to go back and listen to the framework behind Richer Soul and how to create the life of your dreams. You can also find all the show notes for this episode at richersoul.com. Today's quote comes from Zig Ziglar. Stop being afraid of what could go wrong and start being positive about what could go right. Why do we worry so much instead of just going forward? I find 95% of what I worry about is worthless. It never happened. It was irrelevant. And yet, it prevented me from taking a step or being stuck or just wasted a ton of time. Do you know what's causing you anxiety and stress and making you unhappy? I wonder if it's the very thing you think will make you happy. I've noticed kids are much more stressed, and as are parents as well, people in general. Maybe that's why so many are dropping out of the workforce. I know I would never want to work for someone else unless they had an amazing culture, but that's not always easy to find. We're going to chat about that today and what you can do about it and how to look inside to find the happiness you want. Monique is a happiness strategist who teaches students and corporations around the world how to master their lives. She spent the last 25 years studying the mind and its relationship to happiness and suffering. Over 70 universities and colleges use her program, The 10-Minute Mind. Her 8-week online course, The Happiness Baseline, has a 100% success rate in raising the mental awareness for every student who's completed. She hosts the daily In Your Right Mind podcast, where she discusses how a series of small habits determine our well-being. Let's meet Monique and learn from her. Welcome to Richer Soul, Monique Rhodes. It's great to have you join us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Rocky. It's really fun to be here with you.
And I am excited to learn from you today. We always like to start at the beginning. What was it like when you were growing up, and how much did your family and school teach you about money?
It's a great question, Rocky, because in New Zealand, when I was growing up, we didn't really have the polarities that you see in other countries of incredible wealth and incredible poverty. So most of the kids that I grew up with had a similar kind of financial background that I did, except for my close friend who came from the wealthiest family in my city. So I saw money as a way to have adventures. It was something that we didn't have a whole heap of in my family. My mother had grown up at the end of the Depression, so she was very, very cautious about money. So yeah, I guess I learned that money was something to be careful with.
Is that still the case in New Zealand today?
It's changed a bit. There's a lot more money come in. We've had people come from all over the world, and there is definitely a gap between the super rich that have come in predominantly from overseas, and the poverty levels have grown.
So, I mean, what is the actual, like within the country, is it a lower standard of living or is it an average standard of living?
We have one of the highest property prices in the world. So, yeah, that's really, really shifting. It's becoming more and more difficult for people to own their own homes because foreign investors came in and bought up a whole lot of properties in New Zealand, and there's a lack of housing. So, yeah, it's made it a little bit difficult.
And, I don't think people realize this, but I think that's happening a lot throughout the world. I know in London, housing is very expensive. And in the United States, with this latest bout of COVID and inflation and everything else, we're starting to see in many areas of the country, depending on where you are, housing has become unaffordable for the working class family, so to speak.
Yeah. It's really an interesting time for us to be alive, where I see that there are people with just astronomical amounts of money. As a human race, we probably have to look at.
The reason this has happened is because of the power of leverage, meaning that somebody can now reach the entire world quite easily. And so when you can sell to the entire world quite easily, and they willingly hand over money to you, it becomes very easy for you to accumulate a lot of it. And I think that's one of the things that's happened. You didn't see that going back 50 years ago.
No, certainly didn't see that in New Zealand.
Well, I think it's everywhere, so we'll see how that goes. So you grew up there, and then you've got an interesting backstory. You spent a lot of time as a professional musician. Played all over the world. Just out of curiosity, was that like a natural talent for you?
It's always difficult to know what a natural talent is. I think when something's encouraged when you're young, you have often an innate ability. It might appear like an innate ability to move towards something that you're interested in. So I was encouraged. So from the age of about 5 or 6 years old, I started playing the violin. So I think that natural talent is something that's only a very small starting point. And then if that's encouraged in a child, then they have the ability to move towards mastery.
I don't know how much. Well, I guess we do. We encourage our children. The question is, do we encourage them what they want to do or what we want to do?
I'm not sure, Rocky. I think that depends on the parents.
It varies, correct? So let's talk a little bit. What was it like to be a professional musician, to play all over the world?
It was amazing, to get up on a stage with 10,000 people at a time often was an extraordinary experience. And I absolutely loved it. And to be doing something that made me excited, something that was very deeply connecting, something that moved people emotionally was a really wonderful life. I enjoyed it immensely.
And you spent quite a bit of time traveling, right? I know you spent a lot of time in India. What was that all about?
Yeah, I traveled all over the world. I was trying to understand basically something about myself, because when I was younger, I had a very difficult time and I had become incredibly unhappy during my teenage years. And by the time I reached the age of 19, I was really, really, really struggling, to the point where I had attempted to take my own life. And what I was doing as I was traveling was to try and understand if I could shift that. So I was looking at different cultures. I was looking at what happiness meant in different countries to see whether I could uncover some secrets as to what was it that made people happy? And was it possible to shift my own experience of happiness so that I wouldn't be in the despair that I'd found myself in my late teens?
Do you know what caused that despair?
Circumstances that caused it, but I think it was more a question of, was it possible to find a way out of it? And could I find a way out of it that would work and that would last and wouldn't be a kind of fleeting sort of high that so often we experience?
So you said you went and looked at a lot of different cultures to see how they experienced happiness. What was it that you learned from them?
The biggest thing that I began to understand was that you could end up in countries like India, where you see a lot of suffering, you see physical suffering, you see financial suffering, and you could also find extreme amounts of joy there. So there was a Australian couple of they were documentary makers that made a documentary some years ago, and they went on a trip to try and find the happiest community in the world. And they found it in a slum in Mumbai. And that was no surprise to me, because I think that it's very interesting for us we always pin happiness on, a change of external circumstances. But what I really found was that external circumstances don't really affect how happy we are if internally we haven't done the work.
So what does that mean to do the work?
If we look at people like, let's take, for example, Lisa Marie Presley, who recently died, and we can look at, the incredible wealth that she ended up being in. She had fame, she had power, she had money. Even the same with, I've been reading Prince Harry's book, Spare, and you see that privilege, that wealth doesn't really make any difference. So we have to begin to understand that all of the things that we're led to believe are going to make us happier, like fame, power, and money, actually don't. That to have a long-term happiness, we really need to look inside. So we think that happiness comes from external circumstances, but actually it's the mind that's the ordering principle of whether we're happy or not. We could have all of the luck and great fortune in the world, but if we've not worked with our mind, we actually are never going to find a lasting happiness.
So how do we get our mind to be happy? Because I know for most people, it's squawking away with all these different thoughts.
That's right, Rocky. It's pretty out of control. Sometimes I think of it like a wild pony. We wake up in the morning and there's this door to our mind, and it's like being thrown on this wild pony that goes off in all sorts of different directions and, runs off on us. And every so often it gets a little bit worn out. And in that being worn out, it calms down, but the slightest thing spooks it and goes off. Off it goes again. But imagine if we could wake up every morning and there was this beautiful trained horse outside the door of our mind that had a saddle and a bridle, and we could actually lead it. We could be in charge and we could be in control of it. That's what it feels like to have a mind that we've worked with. But to do that, Rocky, we actually have to learn how to tame it or to train it, very much like we do with our body at the gym. We learn with our body at the gym how to train it to get it into shape. And it's vital that we learn to do the same thing with our mind. But it's something we neglect. We just kind of fill our mind up with so much rubbish, so much information. We never clean it out, and we wonder why depression left the roof. I think that's a lot to do with it.
So how does one train their mind?
Well, the biggest tool that we can use is a meditation practice. We learn in meditation practice how to come back to the moment, how to stop our mind from dancing all over the place and bring itself back to being here. And if we can learn to do that, and within the meditation process as well, we also learn how to get to know ourselves, this makes a huge difference. So one of the first things I really encourage people to do is to start with a meditation practice.
And I know some people struggle with this because they say they can't get their mind to quiet down for 10 minutes.
Sure. And I absolutely understand. But I think that the aim there is incorrect. It's like, we think that we have to have a quiet mind, but actually the mind is busy. That's the way that the mind is. That's the way that the mind works. So sometimes we'll meet people, Rocky, and they'll say to us, oh, I just meditated for an hour and I had no thoughts. Yeah, I don't know what they were doing, but they weren't meditating, because our thoughts are as natural as the waves in the ocean. And when we look at the ocean, we just expect the ocean to have waves, just like we expect our mind to have thoughts. But the main thing we have to learn is that if the rise up in the ocean, if we just let them be, the waves naturally dissolve back into the ocean as well. And so it's really important for us to understand that the problem isn't our thoughts. The problem is that we chase after them. So before we know it, we're running off into those movies in our head that all of us know very, very well. So if we can learn, Rocky, just to let those thoughts be and dissolve naturally back into our mind, then we have a completely different relationship with our thoughts and emotions. Our thoughts and emotions cause havoc for us, but it's only because we're busy chasing after them. So when we allow them to dissolve, then our stress and our anxiety begins to dissolve as well. Does that make sense?
It does. I'm reminded of I don't know if it's a story or a quote about a surfer. A surfer doesn't try and change the ocean. He just waits for the right wave to ride it and enjoy it.
Nice. I love that.
It's getting into the flow, right? I mean, because that's literally what surfers are. Like they wait and they feel, and when they get that perfect wave, then they just ride it and they enjoy it. They don't try and change it, which I think is probably what happens, right? We fight our own minds.
And I think it's not even, yes, we do. We try to change the thoughts that we don't want or the emotions that we don't want, but we're also addicted to chasing after the rest of them. And it's exhausting because, if you think about it, it's very rare that we're actually living in the present moment. Most of the time, we're running off into thoughts of the past and running off into thoughts of the future. And if you think about it, the past doesn't actually exist anymore. It's just a figment of our imagination. It's also the only thing we remember is, very slanted towards the way our own mind works. So it's not real, but it's the same with the future. The future doesn't exist yet. So most of the time we're living in these two imaginary places.
Why aren't we living in the present? And how do we get to that moment?
It's very hard for us to live in the present moment because if we live in the present moment, we have to deal with ourselves. So it's natural that our mind as human beings is dancing off into other places. But again, the most important tool to teach us to come back to the present moment is meditation. That's why meditation is so powerful, why it's becoming more and more popular, is that people are realizing to alleviate stress, anxiety, and depression, meditation is one of the most powerful tools we can have in our toolkit.
So is it the practice of meditation, or is it more the involvement of all the breath work that goes along with the meditation?
It's actually learning meditation. So breath work is a part of the skill, but you don't have to use breath work as a way to meditate. You could be meditating as we're talking right now. You bring your focus to an anchor and you try and keep your mind on that anchor. And every time your mind disappears off, you bring it back again. And that's the practice. So breath work is a technique, but it's not meditation in itself.
Interesting. Why are we so addicted to this chase?
It's a great question. Because we don't want to be in the pain of the present moment. So you think about it, if something difficult happens, what's one of the first things we do? We reach for our phone. We reach for the internet, social media, whatever. We struggle to be present with our emotional states. So we're constantly trying to run off somewhere else.
But why?
Well, a lot of us aren't taught, how to deal with our emotions. It's not something that we're taught at school. So when difficult emotions arise, we want to just get ourselves out of them. And it's really different when you look at societies like Tibet, for example, or Bhutan, where children are taught to deal with their emotions from a very young age. They grow up quite differently from us in the West, where in the West we're taught, if you have a difficult emotion, the most important thing is to, reject it and move away from it. Imagine if at school children were taught to deal with their emotions or deal with their thoughts. We're just not. And often we come to this much later in life where we start to recognize that our thoughts and emotions and the way that we're dealing with them is problematic. So that's where we begin to start to think, maybe I need to do this a little bit differently.
Today's episode is sponsored by Profit Answer Man Podcast. Did you know that most small business owners hate looking at their financials? It's one reason they may struggle with business success. The Profit Answer Man podcast helps them ensure they are profitable and can pay their employees and weather the storms we all have to face. It's built on the Profit First methodology of pay yourself first. The Profit Answer Man podcast is a must listen to for every small business owner and anyone who wants to help them survive and thrive. Check it out on your favorite listening platform. So what do they do to teach kids in those countries to deal with their emotions?
They teach them meditation from a young age.
Let's define meditation, because I think everyone has a different viewpoint of it.
Yes. So often you'll hear, meditation tracks that are really creative visualizations. The aim of meditation is a little bit like doing a bicep curl. Okay. Your mind disappears off and you train it to come back to the present moment. The mind disappears off, you bring it back to the present moment. And that is actually what meditation is. It's bringing you back into the present moment. And when you learn to come back into the present moment, instead of it putting you to sleep, which is what most activities in our world do that are addictive, instead what it does is it wakes you up. And it wakes you up to being more focused. It wakes you up to being more present with friends and family. And it wakes you up to the goodness of your own nature. And these are really profound things, profound benefits of learning a meditation practice.
The world has changed a lot, and it seems like there are a lot more distractions grabbing our attention. Have you noticed that? Like when you look at different countries and the way that they behave, are you seeing that throughout, or are there still many places where, I'm not going to say they're immune, but they're not exposed to that level of distraction that we might be in the West?
I think that any country, and I don't know a country now who has access to the internet, will be suffering from this same issue. And this problem is worldwide. So the World Health Organization said that by 2030, and this was pre-pandemic, that depression would be the number one health issue, surpassing obesity. So we're living in a world of deep distraction. We're living in a world where we're struggling more and more to deal with ourselves and handle ourselves. And if we look at the time frame of statistically when things have changed, there is no doubt that the advent of the iPhone has been a game changer for us. As I heard someone say, it's almost like we've given ourselves the keys to the liquor cabinet. Whenever we don't want to deal with something, we have this little gadget in our hand that we can go to appease our emotions, but it doesn't. That's the problem. So what it does is a great source of distraction. And as you and I both know, Rocky, there's a whole economy based around it, based around us being distractible. And they've made a fine art of how they can keep us distracted and keep us in their realm so that we'll buy more and more products from them.
And that kind of takes us back to where we started this conversation, which is how some people have amassed massive amounts of wealth. And one of the simplest ways to do that is through creating distractions, creating, for lack of a better word, what's now passes as entertainment.
Yes. I mean, if you look at, some of the people who are the wealthiest, like Mark Zuckerberg, this is exactly what he's done. And so it's really important for us to, create a conscious and mature relationship with this and make really serious choices for ourselves around these distractions. And it's very difficult, to work against a machine that is really set up to beat us. But there are ways that we can do it by, by putting limits on the amount of time that we spend online, to really become conscious of how do I feel after I have been on social media for a long time, or if I've got a whole bunch of notifications coming through on my phone, how do I feel when I get a notification? And, I do a lot of work in teaching people that they can have control of these notifications. They can have control of their social media usage. And in doing that, to start to see, is it different when I do? And every single person who, shifts the relationship with their phones and with social media sees that they're much happier when they start moving into a more mature relationship where they are more in charge of their usage.
My phone is on silent 24/7, so it doesn't ever ring or ding. I do have a setting where I can actually change it from color to black and white. And I have found that takes a lot of the distraction away. And at the end of the day, if you're on an app and it's black and white, it's kind of boring. So I have found that those two little things do make a difference, but it's still always calling because they've hired some of the best people to make sure that it does.
Absolutely. But not only that, there's a lot of pressure in working environments to be available 24/7. And there's a lot of competition to prove that you're the most loyal to the company. So that's also a problem where you are living in a world where not only are you trying to, kind of bring these notifications down, but you might actually find yourself at a disadvantage if you try and create a boundary between yourself and your phone, which is, my very clear boundaries. If they are answering email or notifications outside of their working hours, they actually get in trouble for it because I want them to be healthy. I want them to come to work. When they're at work, they're at work. When they're not at work, they have their downtime because I know that their mental wellness relies on it. But I don't think there are many bosses that kind of do that. In France, they've actually passed a law now that you're not allowed to contact your employees or expect your employees to answer emails outside of work hours. So many people, the last thing they do before they go to bed is check their emails or, I'm answering my emails so that my work day will be better tomorrow. So there's this bleed between, our work life and our personal life, and it's not healthy.
And I was going to say, it was my understanding that a lot of Europe is got much better boundaries of 5 o'clock, the workday's done, and they turn it off. Whereas the United States doesn't have that boundary. Japan doesn't have that boundary. I'm not sure about other countries, but I have noticed that Germany especially, very strong boundaries to say, it's 5 o'clock, I'm done.
I think that one of the problems is, Rocky, is that if there's not a culture around this, then it's easy for employers to take advantage of people believing that this is what they need to do to retain their jobs. And that's a big pressure.
That is a lot of pressure. So how do we change this?
Well, I think that we have to become aware of it. We have to become conscious of how we feel when we've been online a lot. And we need to become conscious we feel we've been out playing with kids or playing with our dog or playing with our friends and start to see the difference and start to understand that, we may need to actually change our relationship with technology. I know for myself, as much as possible, I stay away from my devices and certainly my computer outside of work time. And, I don't have any of those things on my phone. I don't have the ability to check email or anything like that on my phone. You never catch me checking email outside of my working hours. So I guess it's about, becoming aware of what a mental health crisis that we're in right now. And we keep doing what everybody else is doing, we're going to end up with the same results as everybody else. And there is a wave of depression. So many people are now medicated for depression. So many people are struggling with depression, stress, and anxiety. We have to look at it, go, can I do it differently? Is there a way to do it differently? And that's what I've done, and that's what I teach, because I feel it's such an important thing for us to understand that there is a way out of this.
It's funny. I've been told that a lot of the top tech people in Silicon Valley won't let their kids have phones. And I know many people who are starting to trade in their iPhones for the flip phones, where it's literally impossible to text or to no email, and getting rid of all of that. And so it takes away all of the, what is that? The not the incentive, but the desire, because if you don't have the device, you can't do it.
Exactly. And you could also get things like, sometimes I give my clients lock boxes that you put a timer on their phone, and the phone's locked away. Lock your phone up for an hour, and you can't get into your phone. You can only get in if you break it open with a hammer. So, we have to try and take charge as much as possible against these machines that are literally designed to make our behavior with these devices compulsive, to make a whole bunch of money for someone else. I mean, we have to be aware what it's about at the end of the day. It's not to benefit us. It's to line the pockets of other people.
So how do they do when they put their phone in their lockbox? Like, do they continue doing it, or is it just...
A lot of them do, because a lot of them start to see the benefit. We're always going to move towards things that in the end cause us less pain. So it depends. Some people use them a lot as a tool. Other people use it a couple of times and still think, oh, I want to keep going with my phone. But most of us get to a point where we understand we have to change the relationship with our phone. It's just what is the tool that we're going to use to support us, to fight against, what we're fighting against, which is, these corporations with the greatest psychologists pulling the most amazing tricks on us to keep us engaged.
So beyond getting them to turn off their phones, what else do you work with them on?
To be happier, or to shift their relationship with technology?
To be happier.
We look at a whole bunch of things. We look at gratitude practices as a really profound practice to start to shift our mindset. We look at working with our mind. We look at the kind of language that we're using. We do a really cool thing in one of the weeks of the Happiness Baseline where we look at how much we complain, and that can be a profound awakening for people. We look at self-compassion, which basically means how we are compassionate with ourselves, because most people have, a voice in their head that is being incredibly unkind to them. And we start to look at things in small habits, and we change these small habits. And the Happiness Baseline that I teach is an 8-week online course. And we test people with the standardized happiness test at the beginning from Penn State University. We test them at the end. And we have, I'm very proud to say, a 100% success rate in shifting people's happiness from when they begin the program to when they finish it.
Are people aware that they're complaining?
No, absolutely not. But when they do the challenge I put forward for them in this course, they begin to understand not only how much they complain, but how much they are engaged in complaining conversations with others as well. How it's part of our social structure and a way of bonding to complain with each other.
Misery likes company?
Yeah, but it's also a habitual thing, it's very easy. Sometimes we come down about someone else, or we like to complain about something that's happened, and then everyone chimes in and goes, oh yeah. And then we suddenly feel like we're part of something. So it's just part of being a human being. But as we become more conscious of this, we start to see how much this drains us. And when we stop doing it, our relationships begin to change and become a lot more positive and a lot more energizing than they've been.
How much does the media have to do with that? I know in the United States, politics has been rather polarizing.
I think that, the media, once again, is just another, money-making machine. And the more outrageous things are, or the more polarizing things are, the more people click on them. So, the media machine has got that figured out, and they've got it down to a pretty fine art. And again, the question is, we can't change the media, but we can change how or how much we engage with it.
We don't have cable in our house, so that helps. I can't watch the news. Makes life easier.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I haven't grown up in New Zealand where we didn't have cable, and seeing how much television is in people's homes in the United States is quite shocking for someone like me. You like to have a TV pretty much in every room, and you're filling up your space with all this fear and anxiety. And you wonder why in the United States, fear and anxiety and aggression is through the roof, because you're living in a culture of it.
And it's very hard to change culture, but we can change how we interact with culture.
Well, you can change the culture of your home. You can change the culture of your family. You can change the culture of the way that you choose to live in relationship to the larger culture. And that's where you get to make the choices.
And that's so, so true. So what does it mean to live an extraordinary life?
So for me, Rocky, having an extraordinary life has meant, going to extraordinary places, meeting a lot of my heroines that I've looked up to, having experiences that have been just amazing. Like I rode a motorbike through India for 4 years. I've lived in slums in India. I've lived in castles in Switzerland and everything in between. But for me, the true extraordinary life that has been the most powerful for me has been getting myself to a place where I'm really happy, figuring out how to shift mindset and shift myself so that I can wake up every morning excited about the day and happy. It doesn't mean that there aren't difficult things that happen. There are. Life is suffering. That's what we all are dealing with. But it doesn't affect me in the same way that it used to. So, I feel that from that place alone, I live an extraordinary life, because it's almost like I get all the juice out of life, as well as having lived an extraordinary life on an external level as well.
So it's changing your relationship. It's not changing the world. It's changing the way we react to what the world gives us.
That's true. There was a amazing Indian saint. I think he was a 12th century saint called Shanti. He tells the story of, and he talks in old language of what we try and do is that we don't want to suffer. So we try and cover the whole world with leather so that when we walk on the earth, it doesn't hurt our feet. But instead, what we can do is just cover our feet with leather. And that's the way I really try to live.
Excellent advice. Is there anything that we should have talked about today but didn't get a chance to?
No, I think it's just this point, Rocky, of that each of us have the ability to master our own happiness. We're not victims. All of us have had difficult things that have happened, and I am no exception at all. But I've learned how to master my life so that I'm a very, very happy person, and I would not swap that for anything in the world.
And that's what it comes down to, mastering ourselves, mastering the reflection in the mirror, and taking charge of our life and making that choice that this is the way we choose to live it.
That's it, Rocky. Beautifully said.
It's time to learn the secrets of life. What's your secret to living an abundant life?
Oh, that's a big question. What is my secret to living an abundant life? Having a deep relationship and a loving relationship with myself.
And it comes back to the same thing. It's ourselves. Everyone's looking for everything outside. You got to look within. What did you learn later in life that you wish you would have learned sooner?
That happiness is a habit.
And I don't think we think of happiness as a habit. We think of it more as something we are or aren't, but you've got to build the habit of making it so.
That's it.
If you were to give an 18-year-old one specific piece of wisdom, what would it be?
Learn to work with your mind. Build a relationship with your mind. It will change everything.
And it also means you have to take control of your mind and not give it over to adults and let them tell you what to do.
That's right. Although sometimes adults have a little bit of wisdom. So it's finding that balance, isn't it, Robbie?
It is finding the balance. They may have wisdom, but it's also, there are certain parts of wisdom that are truthful all the time, but it's also figuring out what works for you. And is that best for you and where you want to go and what you want to do?
That's right.
If people would like to learn more about you and how you help people to become happier, how do they do that?
Yeah, well, there's two easy ways. The first is I have a website called howhappyami.com that'll take you to a quiz where you can have a look at your happiness levels. And the other way is that I do a daily podcast called In Your Right Mind. And that's another fantastic way to come and, get to know what it is that I'm teaching.
Thank you so much for joining us. We'll make sure we have links in the show notes so everyone can find you.
Having me, Rocky. It's been such a pleasure.
I'm a big fan of turning off the phone, the news, my emails, especially later in the day. What can you turn off so you're not distracted, you're more present and in the moment? It's not easy. Our mind sure does like chatter. I find breath work and controlling the emotions and how your body feels can help dramatically. However, there's a skill to learn of how to take control. And as Monique mentioned, we don't teach this in school. More often than not, we probably do the opposite. I'm learning that different kinds of breath techniques are for different types of situations, whether it's anxiety, fear, stress, tiredness. Learning how to change the way you breathe and control it can change how your body feels, which then change the thoughts that are going on in your head. What can you do to improve? That's really the question. Take a tiny step forward, make a little change, and keep going. Hey, if you enjoy or get value from Richer Soul, I'd really appreciate it if you'd support it by forwarding it to a friend or sharing it wherever you typically share podcasts you love. Next week, we've got on Javon McCormick to talk about becoming a modern leader. It's a powerful story, and you're going to love his background and what he's been able to achieve and how he's been able to do that. Thanks for listening. Have an abundant week.